Welcome to the library lived in. I am Anise, and this is my co-host Lisa.
Hi.
And this month's book is called Wild Animals I Have Known by Ernest Thompson Seton. And so it's actually a collection of short stories that was published in 1898. And I will go ahead and read the little blurb about it here. I forgot to pull it up.
That's okay.
All right. Oh, this is not the right thing. A stirring account of the lives of 8 wild animals, including Lobo, the king of Currumpah, Silverspot, the story of a crow, Raggylug, the story of a cottontail rabbit, Bingo, the story of a dog, the Springfield fox, the pacing mustang, Woolly, the story of a yaller dog, and Redruff, the story of the Don Valley partridge. So overall, I'm going to give it 2.5 stars.
That's pretty low for you.
It is. I did like some of the parts of the stories. There were other parts that I definitely did not like. They were interesting comparing to animal stories now. But I don't think I would read it again.
That's fair enough.
How many stars do you give it?
I'm probably gonna go with 2. I read this. Well, I did the audio, but I listened to it before I did any background reading on the author, and I feel like after I did the background reading on the author, I was like, oh, okay, maybe it would have had more significance to me if I'd done it in the other order. I don't know, but I really didn't enjoy it at all. There were like maybe 3 stories that I enjoyed, like the first half of the story or 2/3 of the story, and then it went downhill, and I was like traumatized. So it was a good learning experience. Like you said, comparing to modern stories written from the perspective of animals. But it was rough.
Yeah, and so what's noteworthy about this book is that it's generally considered to be the first book in the realistic wild animal fiction genre. And I was a little surprised reading that it was such a popular book. I guess probably more popular back then than it is now, although a lot of the reviews on Goodreads are very high, like 4 and 5 stars.
Yeah. And it says it's never been out of print. Never. Since really surprised me, because I feel like there are other books that are better that have been out of print for a while, and I don't understand that.
Yeah. So I already mentioned that this book is a collection of short stories, and kind of the connecting thing between all of them is that Ernest Thompson Seton is the author / narrator, and he's telling these stories as if they actually happened and like happened from events that he observed, which I think has been disputed. I think the first story in the collection about Lobo the wolf is the most famous from the collection because there's actual evidence that that story was true. There's photos and other accounts from other people about those events. And we'll talk a little bit later about the nature fakers controversy that was kind of spurred on by this book. And And I think because of the way that it's laid out, we'll probably just talk about characters and storyline and the setting kind of all smushed together. So, in these stories, Seaton tells them, he usually starts out telling a little bit about the area that it's taking place, what he was doing there, and then how he came across the animal and things he observed the animal doing or happening. And they all ended badly.
They were terrible.
Which was interesting. And I was expecting, from what I had read about the nature fakers, I was expecting the stories to be a lot more sympathetic towards the animals, but they did not seem that way to me at all. So I can only imagine what people thought about animals before this. Because pretty much all of them die, and sometimes in really, really terrible ways.
Violence.
And it didn't really leave me with the feeling that anybody cared about the animals. Like, there were certain things that they did that seemed more human-like that the author noted and admired, but it wasn't enough to spur him to protect the animal or anything like that. And so that confused me a little bit.
I felt like there's only one time, and it's with the Lobo story, where he feels bad. Mm-hmm. You know, there's any sort of like human remorse about the treatment of the animal. Mm-hmm. And I did think that was interesting, because if you look, of course, now, like, we tell so many stories, especially children's stories, but so many stories from the perspective of animals. And I took one of my classes in college for, was an education major course, was talking about the reason that we do that is because everybody can relate. Mm-hmm. It omits race, it omits gender, it omits, you know, anybody can relate. And so I think if you look at the stories that we tell now that are based on animals, they're completely humanized, right? We just stick an animal in a human situation. And I expected this to be more like that. And it's not like that at all. Yeah. It's very wild. It's very, I felt like, more realistic. Although obviously some people didn't feel that way when it came out.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting too, that he spent so much time observing the animals but not interfering. Like, there were a couple of times when someone was hunting down the animal, he would pretend to go along with it but then not really do anything, which I thought was interesting. Again, that why he didn't just stand up for the animal and say, no, I'm not gonna kill it, instead of pretending to go along with it and then just acting like it was a mistake that it got away or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't feel like there's any sympathy for the animal. It's just an observer, you know, like, I want to be a third party observer. I'm just going to take notes here, you know.
And I think part of it too is probably because of the time period, and I think most or all of them are set in Canada. And so I think anyone reading his book when it was originally published probably had their own experiences with wild animals to compare with this. Whereas reading it now, like, pretty much the only wild animals we see are like birds and squirrels and like not really interesting wild animals.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting.
I agree. And I think that's, you know, part of that perspective of why do I think this is so wild? Well, because what do I have to compare it to? You know, so my view is probably skewed too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
They did note in the blurb about wild animals I have known that previous to this, predatory animals like wolves and lions and those kinds of things were pretty much demonized in literature. They were always like the murderous, like coming into towns and like attacking people, eating people. And that's pretty much the only way they were ever portrayed. And so even though it still seems a little intense in this book, I think compared to any kind of story where they're man-eating animals, I can see this is a lot more sympathetic, but still a little shocking, I guess.
There is definitely some, I don't want to say humanizing, but maybe that's it, but maybe some assumption, you know, like the bunny rabbits between, I don't know, there's this warm, fuzzy relationship between mom and baby bunny. And okay, well, I feel like that's something we put on, you know, that's not, we don't really know how does the rabbit feel, like what level of emotions does the rabbit feel or whatever. And like with the wolves, the issue of the mate comes up, but we don't really know how much emotion is involved there or what's, I don't know. I feel like we can't really truly understand that, but I think he was trying to put what he felt what he could see there. So, and that, yeah, I think you're probably right. I think before that, that's not the understanding that, you know, that was there at all.
Yeah. And so it's interesting to think about how things have progressed from animals being these vicious brutes all the way until now, when like people, if a dog dies in a movie, people like won't go watch it. Like I know a lot of people who say that, like if an animal dies in the movie, they cannot watch it. Which, I mean, I understand.
It's not real.
It's sad, but I think maybe it's almost gone too far in the other direction now, where there are some people who value animal lives as much as human lives, which I don't think is a good idea.
Or more so. I know there are people that I know that are very, they really struggle with other people, but animals, no problem, you know? And I don't know, you have to live with other people, so I feel like you have to figure out how to work with other people. I don't know. It's tough. I did want to say, so I did the audiobook, right? But when at the end, I went back and I pulled the printed version and I reread the introduction that Seaton wrote. And he talks about kind of the way all the stories are sad, terrible endings. But he said he did that on purpose. He said, because no wild animals die nicely. Like they all die in life and death struggles. And so anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there, that some of it did seem harsh, but I think he was trying to hold to a certain amount of reality.
That does make sense. And looking at it that way, it would be kind of, I don't know. I probably wouldn't be disappointed if like the wild animal rode off into the sunset and just like got to keep being free.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a balance. There's a balance. There was a little issue in the kids in the neighborhood the other day finding a snake that one of them just wanted to kill the snake. It's a snake, we should just kill the snake. And a child stepped in and rescued the snake. And just because it's not doing anything to you. It's not doing anything to you, leave it alone. You know, you don't need to harm it. If you're afraid of the snake, then just leave. He's not in your house. He's not, just leave. So, I think there's a balance in between that, you don't have to do harm.
Right.
So, but yeah. But like you said, I think maybe we've gotten a little too sympathetic today. I think too, like if you look, I don't know, I think when wild animals cross over, when we have that human wild animal crossover that does happen occasionally, it seems like humans now don't know how to behave. Like when the crocodiles end up in somebody's backyard in Florida or something like that, the rare occasion, people don't know how to act, and the people that get too close that think, oh, it's okay, or whatever. I feel like
all the time in the national parks, because that's like probably the only time people are seeing wild animals, maybe for the first time in their life they're ever near a wild animal, and they think it's like the zoo, and it doesn't end well.
Yes. So I feel like part of that is education. Yeah. If all they've ever read is warm, fuzzy stories about animals, then probably don't know the difference, right?
Yeah.
Big deal. Kind of a big deal. I'm sorry. We're gonna have
to which of the stories did you enjoy the most?
Well, I really enjoyed the bunny story till that half, 2/3 of the way point, but then I knew what was coming. So the first bit I thought I was like, oh, I'm really liking this one. It's not bad. So, but there at the end, there at the end, it got a little sad and intense. And after you read the first 3, you knew they were all going to end that way. So, you know, that was what was coming.
Yeah. So I liked the Pacing Mustang the best. I've always been partial to horse stories. As a kid, I loved the Black Stallion books and anything by Marguerite Henry, any horse books I really, really loved. So I liked that story a lot. He died at the end, like all the other animals. But, well, and that didn't... I thought this ending was probably the best out of all of them, but maybe this was what was referred to in the controversy as not being realistic, because I don't really think a horse, having been captured by people after avoiding them for so long and escaping when they were trying to catch him, I really don't think he would have just run off a cliff like that. I don't think a horse would have done that.
Yeah, I don't really know horses well enough to say.
Well, I mean, like any animal, they want to be free, but I don't think they'll kill themselves rather than be free, except in like cases where they're in captivity and they decline just because they're not eating or whatever, they're unhappy, but they're not intending to
have a survival instinct.
I don't think animal suicide is the thing. I really don't.
I think you're probably right. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
So that was the one I liked. All of the others, I liked the language that he used, and the descriptions I thought were interesting, but it was a little tough to get through, to like read the next one when the animal just died and I knew that it was just going to happen again.
I was glad that I did want this one as an audiobook when I was listening to them, because I could just do something else. If I just keep my hands busy, then I can, I'll just push through it. However, remember I said I didn't read anything about the author till afterwards, and not realizing that he was an artist. He was trained as an artist, and apparently the original has some pretty amazing drawings.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back, and that's what I went back and I found it,
Mm-hmm.
so that I could look at them. And there are some pretty impressive pictures.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I was sad that I missed that part of it, but maybe not so much like the tear jerking.
Yeah.
Oh, need more tissues part.
Yeah. So let's talk about the controversy now.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So the Nature Fakers controversy was an early 20th century American literary debate highlighting the conflict between science and sentiment in popular nature writing. So the two viewpoints were people writing animal stories like Ernest Thompson Seton and Jack London would say that there was truth to their portrayals of anthropomorphic and wild animals. And people on the other side were saying that animals don't have the ability to adapt, learn, teach, or reason. And so it was about 5 years after this book was published, then there was an article published in the Atlantic Monthly called Real and Sham Natural History. And the author of that article was saying that the authors of these kinds of books, that it was all just fake. They were just making things up, like none of it was based on reality. And some of the authors responded to his criticism, and some of them stayed quiet. But anyways, the back and forth between all of them became like this really huge controversy that raged in the public press for nearly 6 years. So
they couldn't figure out anything else to, fuss about.
Thank you. Thank you. Go play outside. You can go outside. Okay. Do you want to go eat your lunch? Anyways, so this was a really big thing. And the president eventually got involved, who was Theodore Roosevelt, who considered himself a naturalist, although some people would argue that being a trophy hunter is not the same thing as being a naturalist. And so I think it also kind of coincided with the formation of the national parks, because Yellowstone had just been established as the first national park in 1872. And so by 1900, there were 7 national parks. And so this is really like in the public consciousness that there are these places you can go, these amazing places that are beautiful and have wild animals, and everything is just untouched and perfect. And so that probably was one of the reasons why everybody kept talking about this and kept fighting about it and debating it. And so so there was a lot of back and forth with the authors and the original author of the article and supporters of one side or the other. And So Seaton said he didn't respond initially to the article that criticized him. But as it dragged on and on, he eventually said that his intention in writing his stories was to translate the animals' language into English, as they have no speech as we understand it. And so he's telling these things from the perspective of the animal, but in a way that we could understand and relate to. And so they, okay, you want her to be dressed.
That's what I was thinking, is that it was more his attempt to say, like, I've lived this long with the animals. This is how I feel.
Right.
Yeah, this is how I feel that, you know, or the communication that I feel that they're giving off, you know, and then trying to put that into his own words, you know.
Right. And I think the other side of it, the scientists were probably worried that the sentimental, what they called fantastical point of view of the animals would keep people from learning what animals were really like. And I think they were probably right to be a little worried. Considering what we just talked about with people nowadays not having any idea how to act around wild animals.
Sure.
And maybe the prevalence of pets having something to do with it also. That if the only experience you've ever had with animals is like as a member of your family that you're used to touching and you're used to talking to and living with, if you don't make the distinction between that animal and other animals that you come across, I can see how that is a bad thing.
Well, even to take that a step farther, I don't know if you look at Cesar Millan and these other animal whisperer type people, I feel like they really look at animals and their behavior and then tell people, you're treating your animals like human beings. You're not treating them like animals, right? I feel like a common repetition of the shows and the discussions, that's what it's coming from, is people treat animals like they're people, and they don't look at and read the animals' communication as they communicate, you know, and then treat them the way that animals expect to be treated.
Right.
And so I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like it's this huge thing where nobody knows how to act then. You know, nobody knows how to interact with the animals at all. So.
Right. And I think also that it gets dangerous when people, like you said before, that there's some people who have a hard time interacting with other people and so they turn to animals instead, which I can understand is a comforting thing and a good thing as long as it's not taken too far. Like when people start to think that animals are better than humans, like in their behavior or whatever, I think that's not a good thing, because that just makes you less and less able to relate to other people, even though it's really hard. And with animals, it's so easy because they don't talk. And they
don't judge you on
so
many things, you know. If you treat them kind, then they're happy with you. And it's just as easy as it is.
And I think that's really a great thing, but it shouldn't come at the expense of other people, because even though animals are great and I love animals, no animal is ever going to have the potential that a human being has. And I think that's where people get confused, like with the that gorilla that was killed when that kid fell into its enclosure, or that lion that was killed in Africa, and everyone was freaking out. Like, honestly, there are other things that we should be worrying about, I think. And it's sad. It is sad when anything dies, a person or an animal, or like me at the end of my gardening season, I'm sad when my plants die. But death is a part of life, and I think people don't accept it or understand it as well as they used to. Because even though things seem bad sometimes with everything going on in the world and people being killed in sad ways, I would venture to say that less people are dying now than in the past.
Yeah, I feel like that's a whole nother thing that I feel pretty passionate about, is how we process death. Human beings process and handle death, and that we really need to be able to do a lot better about that. That's a big struggle. I feel like we turn to coping mechanisms instead of healthy functional way of handling things. So, and I think our pets sometimes become part of our coping with life. So, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I'm badmouth the animals now. But we have a dog and we love him and he's part of our family, but I feel like he doesn't get to replace functioning in everyday life either. So he gets to be a part of our household, but he, if you're not functioning and you just want to curl up with the dog and not do anything because you can't handle what's out there, well, you're going to have to get up and figure out how to handle what's going on out in life too. So I don't know. I think that's what it comes down to.
Well, and I was thinking also, there's probably a big difference in people reading this book when it's published. Maybe they wouldn't have thought it was so sad that all of the animals died, because if you live on a farm or out in the country, you are basically almost automatically exposed to more life and death type things, whether it's in raising livestock or hunting for your meat or anything like that. And so I think it's interesting to think about how different these stories would have seemed to them versus to us.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. The other thing I was thinking of too, I'm not sure of the timeline, but the whole psychology and the argument, which we still kind of have, of nature versus nurture, like how much of us is DNA versus how you're raised, and how would that have affected how the people saw the animals as well. If you look at the scientists of the time, and I really don't know the timeline, I didn't look it up because I didn't think of it before, but if the thinking at the time was, well, this is science and this is the biology of the animals and this is how it is.
Right. Well, I think one of the examples in this controversy that received the greatest amount of attention was from a book written by, oh, I have to find his name now. William J. Long. He received a lot of criticism by the same man who wrote the initial article because he wrote in one of his books about a story that he said was true. It was absolutely true about a bird that had an injured leg and like went down to the edge of the river and like mixed some mud with some like little straw stuff and made a cast for its leg. And so everyone was saying that scientists were saying that it was impossible and that only humans do things like that, and an animal would never think to do that. And Long said, if scientists are honestly looking for new facts in the animal world, I have enough to fill several regular editions of Science, every one of which is supported not only by my own personal observation, but by the testimony of other honest men whose word can be taken without hesitation. And so I do not have enough experience with wild animals to know if a wild animal would do that or not.
Interesting thought. There was a video that went around a little while ago, and with like everything on the internet, I don't know. And I didn't even do any research on it. I have no idea. But the video was a couple of monkeys in maybe India somewhere. It was super busy. And one of them was injured. They like fell over train tracks or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see this? Okay. And the other one basically like gives it CPR.
Mm-hmm. So
in the video, you see this happen. And so it was like this viral video that went around. I don't know, was it a legitimate thing or not, but it looked anyways. And people were just shocked. This was this amazing thing how does this monkey know how to do that, right? But I just think we don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
No, you never know.
Right. And I wonder how much too was from the scientists feeling threatened because there was no proof either way for these things that they were saying.
Right.
And I think we know so much more about animals now than we did then. And I think you just have to watch like Planet Earth or something to know that animals are really intelligent and they can learn and adapt, even just to the presence of humans and how much things have changed for us, especially in cities. For animals that were living in cities, they've adapted to all of the changes.
Yes.
And so I don't think I could say one way or the other. I think it's important to know how things work as much as you're able to, but I don't think that should stop you from appreciating maybe the more fantastic sides of these kinds of things either.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to throw one other thing in, like from this whole controversy that came about. You said Seton didn't respond right away.
Uh-huh.
But so what year was this published? I forget.
The article or his book?
1898. This one was 1898.
Yes.
And then the article was published
5 years later, 1903.
1903. So in 1909, he published the Life Histories of Northern Animals.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, the thing that I had read about the life histories kind of was like, well, to prove himself, and kind of because of being sort of put off by this attack, was, well, I'm going to go show you real natural history. So he put these two like encyclopedic volumes together of natural history, just like cut and dried facts. See, I do know what I'm talking about. So it was this whole like, let me prove to you, I really do know what I'm talking about. I do know the science of these things. So he put out these two big fat volumes of natural history. So I thought that was interesting. That kind of his response was to show the writer of the article that,
right,
I'm not going to just argue with you. I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to show that I really do know what I'm doing. And after I forget, I just keep forgetting the name of the author of the article. When he passed away, the group that was managing his memorial and all of his estate and everything put together an award for naturalists, and they awarded it to Seton after the second volume of that book came out. So I thought that was pretty impressive as well.
Yeah, that is ironic.
Right. So
that's funny. So the controversy started to wind down when the president got involved, which was Theodore Roosevelt, and the man who wrote the article had been trying to get him to get involved, but he wouldn't do it. And then he finally did. And he said, I know that as president, I ought not to do this. And so he spoke out against all of the nature fakers who were writing what he called unnatural history. And he's the one who popularized the term nature faker for these authors. And what he said, this is what he said. It is evident that the nature faker completely deceives many good people who are wholly ignorant of wildlife. Sometimes he draws on his own imagination for his fictions. Sometimes he gets them secondhand from irresponsible guides or trappers or Indians. And he was also really critical of Jack London's books, especially in White Fang. And so Theodore Roosevelt was also really bothered that children might be reading these books. And he said, as for the matter of giving these books to children for the purpose of teaching them the facts of natural history, why, it's an outrage.
I'd be slightly worried about giving this to a child too, but only because they probably have nightmares.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so the author who had written the story about the bird who made the cast for its leg was up in arms about the president getting involved in this. And so he sent letters, and he published articles with titles like President a Slayer, Not Lover of Animals. Roosevelt is a man who takes savage delight in whooping through the woods, killing everything in sight. The idea of Mr. Roosevelt assuming the part of a naturalist is absurd. He is a hunter. And so I didn't look them up, but I'm planning on it. There were political cartoons drawn about this controversy.
Oh my goodness.
Which seemed like they might be entertaining to read. But it did comfort me a little bit to know that even more than 100 years ago, there's, like, the press just cares about the dumbest things. And so I feel a little better when I'm on Facebook and I see all of this dumb stuff. At least it's not new. Or maybe that's more sad. I don't know.
Maybe that can be a response next election cycle on Facebook is to just go pick out all the old dumb stuff and just start posting like 100-year-old, 200-year-old political cartoons.
That's
what I thought was really interesting is reading that Roosevelt and Seton had been in touch years before, and that Roosevelt kind of was a supporter of Seton. He had commissioned artwork from him, and he had gotten some, I think they called them study skins, basically some animal skins and things from him. And so he'd known him long before this. He was somebody that he'd actually like spoken with and worked with, or at least interacted with. So for him to come out and, you know, this was a big, it wasn't just like I'm picking on somebody I don't know,
Right.
you know. So I thought that was really something.
And so after his first statements about the nature fakers, which just riled everything up again, he made another statement, another article, and he listed the nature writers that he admired, which included the one who had written the original Nature Fakers controversy, and criticized the others. He quoted Alice in Wonderland. He said he was criticizing the yellow journalists of the woods who can easily believe 3 impossible things before breakfast, and they do not mind in the least if the impossibilities are mutually contradictory.
Oh not harsh at all.
And so he changed tactics a little bit in this article, and instead of attacking the authors, he started to attack the publishers and the school boards who were accepting this material for use. And this is what he said: "Our quarrel is not with these men, but with those who give them their chance. We who believe in the study of nature feel that a real knowledge and appreciation of wild things, of trees, flowers, birds, and of the grim and crafty creatures of the wilderness, give an added beauty and health to life. Therefore, we abhor deliberate or reckless untruth in this study as much as in any other. Therefore, we feel that a grave wrong is committed by all who, holding a position that entitles them to respect, yet condone and encourage such untruth." And so after that statement, it began to die down. And there was a few more things said about that fake natural history could be defended on the grounds that they find it entertaining and interests school children in the wildlife about them. But then they compared it to making U.S. history more entertaining for the kids to read, like if Washington took his army over the Delaware in balloons, or like all kinds of things. It gives all kinds of examples, and that you can't just take liberties with things to make them entertaining. So I think I would go back to what I said before, that there's probably a place for both as long as you have both.
Right. And that you understand the difference.
Right.
You understand fact versus fiction.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Something I forgot to mention was that Ernest Thompson Seton was one of the founders of the Boy Scouts of America. And also, this book in particular, Wild Animals I Have Known, was a very influential book in Sir David Attenborough's childhood. So, interesting connection.
That's interesting. I was going to mention that too. And the Boy Scouts of America, Boy Scouts of America came after scouting in England.
Mm-hmm.
But from the different sources that I read, it sounds like, and it makes it sound like the scouting startup in England kind of ripped off his ideas, that he was feeling out the ideas for, basically a scouting organization, and he'd started the Woodcraft group. And And that, you know, I can't think of his name, the Lord in England that started scouting,
Mhm.
kind of took all this information and didn't give him credit. And so when they started to do, you know, when they started talking about, well, let's do scouting in the States, then he jumped on because it was like, hey, this is my stuff.
It's Lord Baden-Powell.
Thank you. Yes. So I guess they said one of the first guides printed here in the States for Boy Scouts of America, he actually claims that. He actually takes credit for, like, this is my material, my stuff, and I wrote it first.
Right. Well,
So,
and there were also some other controversies in his life surrounding the Boy Scouts. Once he was in the organization, he eventually had to resign because they were trying to make it a rule that you couldn't be in charge of it if you weren't American, and he wasn't. He was born in England.
yeah, he lived in Canada for so long.
Mm-hmm. And I think there was also some issue with his wife, who was a suffragette. But I couldn't find a lot of information about that.
I want to learn more about her. The other thing I think that was an issue for him with the Boy Scouts is that he wanted to incorporate a lot of the Native American cultural traditions and spiritual elements into scouting. And there's another group of thought that did not want that wanted to keep it more on the self-reliance aspect of things and like hunting and that sort of thing. And he didn't want to do that. He wanted to get away from that set of things, which comes back to the Lobo story. That after he did, you know, after he took that time in his life where took that job where he was out hunting wolves, and this whole experience with Lobo is supposed to have made a big shift in his life where he no longer wanted anything to do with hunting and killing of animals. So, but apparently that was part of the Boy Scout issue as well. So, but very interesting. Very interesting. And he did end up becoming a U.S. citizen later, like in the 30s.
He did, and he lived in New Mexico, and he was actually friends with Georgia O'Keeffe, which is also super interesting.
I saw that. Yeah.
Carter, I said my name is Emmy, and he said I know he can't talk very much.
That's okay.
That's why.
Okay.
He knows.
That's
he can't talk very much. I said okay.
Okay.
But it's super exciting. I feel like he had an interesting life. I found one thing that said the reason he started out hanging out in nature so much was because he didn't get along with his father very well, and that his father was abusive. And so he would, you know, like, I'm going to go be outside all day. But I couldn't find anything else about it to verify it or back it up.
No, I saw that, but I didn't look up about it at all. But I thought that was interesting, and that probably lends a little more credibility to his stories. If he really did observe nature so much, then he may have seen things that nobody else saw.
It'd be interesting to know. Yeah, I think he had an interesting long life, kind of a lot of interesting things. Did you see, so he had one daughter with his first marriage, and then he adopted a daughter in his second marriage. And the second daughter was a writer. Did you see that?
Yes.
The adopted daughter, the second marriage, was a writer. And she wrote romance novels. I'm trying to think. Her name was Dee Seaton. And she wrote romance novels and then oversaw his estate, like after he passed. That was her. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. So
I think we've covered everything that I had written down for this book. Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I think you hit all the things that I hadn't thought of.
Nice. You want to introduce this month's pick?
Yes. So We're gonna do a short story this month. The interest of being creepy because it's October and we're gonna do The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. So originally this was within the collection called The Sketchbook of Jeffrey Canyon. So it was 34 essays and short stories, but we're just going to do the one short story this time. And I don't know, for those of you that grew up, I don't know if you had that experience or not, but the Disney Headless Horseman, it was The Adventures of Ichabod Crane.
I watched it last night.
Did you? That was a classic of my youth. Anyways, that's what this is. That's what it's based on. Is this this story? Although not identical.
No.
So, but that's what we're gonna read this month.
Excellent. I'm very excited.
Me too. Because I read it once a long, long time ago. I remember really enjoying it. So it'd be good.
Well.
All right. Anything else we need to throw out there?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, see you all later.
Bye.